short. They're like, this one's like 9 pages, I think. Like, that's crazy. This will hold me accountable, force me to read more. Right now I'm reading Stranger, Albert Camus. Why did I get some shit on my book? Damn. This shit never stay clean. It was not there before. All kinds of shit on it. What the hell? I put it on a notebook. What got on it? Oh my goodness. So much shit got on it. The cat. Oh, the cat walked on it. That's definitely what happened. Because she was locked in here all day. Yeah. Gotta pulled out one of my other lights, make the lighting more even so I'm not as washed out. Because when I do this, it's not so bad actually. That kind of washes it out more, but it looks a little. I think it looks a little better. I think the lighting looks a lot better when I do that. Now if I yeah, it's probably better if I turn it up. I'm brighter. I think it looks just overall better, but okay. I got my clothes hung up right there drying with a fan on it. Alright, let's get this bad boy cracking. Put my shit on do not disturb. I do not wish to be disturbed. Okay. So last chapter, I believe, it's just essentially after his Mammon? Okay, Mammon. It's Mersu. The main character's name is Mersu. Chapter 1, his mom had just died as Mammon. And he was describing the funeral. How his boss was upset, or how he had to ask for time off from his boss. He didn't recognize or like any of the people, I think, at the funeral. Then the next chapter is him worrying about the fact that he got 2 days off plus the weekend. His boss was upset about it. He woke up early and decided after shaving to go for a swim. Met an old coworker that he used to work with. They hung out, went to see a movie. They went back to his place. They had sex. He woke up, and then realized she was gone. The detail of smelling the salt or something, that whatever it was, the scent of where she laid. Then woke back up, made a quick breakfast, and then just kind of sat on his balcony, smoking cigarettes, observing things going by. It ends with, it occurred to me that anyway one more Sunday was over. That Mammon was buried now. That I was going back to work, and that really nothing had changed. So he's kind of realizing that life just moves on. Life just carries on. That's essentially what the ending of chapter 2 was. So I'm going to try and read chapter 3 and 4. They're very short, super short. This is a very short book. There's only about, I don't even know how many chapters are. Oh god, 5. Is there only 5 chapters? No way. I'm almost done with the book, technically, I guess. Okay, let's lock in. I worked hard at the office today. The boss was nice. He asked me if I wasn't too tired, and he also wanted to know Mammon's age. I said, about 60, so not as to make a mistake. And I don't know why, but he seemed to be relieved somehow and to consider the matter closed. There was a stack of freight invoices that had piled up on my desk, and I had to go through them all. Before leaving the office to go to lunch, I washed my hands. I really like doing this at lunchtime. I don't enjoy it so much in the evening because the roller towel you use is soaked through. One towel has to last all day. I mentioned it once to my boss. He told me that he was sorry, but it was really a minor detail. I left it a little late, at 12:30 with Emmanuel, who works as a dispatcher. The office overlooks the sea, and we took a minute to watch the freighters in the harbor, which was ablaze with sunlight. Then a truck came toward us with its chains rattling and engine backfiring. Emmanuel said, "How about it?" And I started running. The truck passed us, and we ran after it. I was engulfed by the noise and the dust. I couldn't see anything, and all I was conscious of was the sensation of hurtling forward in a mad dash through cranes and winches, masts bobbing on the horizon, and the hulls of ships alongside us as we ran. I was first to grab hold and take a flying leap. Then I reached out and helped Emmanuel scramble up. We were out of breath, and the truck was bumping around in the uneven cobblestones of the quay in a cloud of dust and sun. Emmanuel was laughing so hard he could hardly breathe. We arrived at Celeste's dripping with sweat. Celeste was there, as always, with his big belly, his apron, and his white mustache. He asked me if things were all right now. I told him yes they were, and I said I was hungry. I ate fast and had some coffee. Then I went home and slept for a while because I'd drunk too much wine, and when I woke up I felt like having a smoke. It was late, and I ran to catch a streetcar. I worked all afternoon. It got very hot in the office, and that evening, when I left, I was glad to walk back slowly along the docks. The sky was green. I felt good. But I went straight home because I wanted to boil myself some potatoes. On my way upstairs in the dark, I ran into old Salamano, my neighbor across the landing. He was with his dog. The two of them have been inseparable for 8 years. The spaniel has a skin disease, mange, I think, which makes almost all of its hair fall out and leaves it covered with brown sores and scabs. After living together for so long, the two of them alone in one tiny room, they ended up looking like each other. Old Salamano has reddish scabs on his face and wispy yellow hair. As for the dog, he's sort of taken on his master's stooped look, muzzle down, neck straining. They look as if they belong to the same species, and yet they hate each other. Twice a day at 11 and 6, the old man takes the dog out for a walk. They haven't changed their route in 8 years. You can see them in the Rue de Lyon, the dog pulling the man along until old Salamano stumbles. Then he beats the dog and swears at it. The dog cowers and trails behind. Then it's the old man who pulls the dog. Once the dog is forgotten, it starts dragging its master along again, and again, gets beaten and sworn at. Then they both stand there on the sidewalk and stare at each other, the dog in terror, the man in hatred. It's the same thing every day. When the dog wants to urinate, the old man won't give him enough time and yanks at him, so that the spaniel leaves behind a trail of little drops. If the dog has an accident in the room, it gets beaten again. This has been going on for 8 years. Celeste is always saying, "It's pitiful," but really, who's to say? When I ran into him on the stairs, Salamano was swearing away at the dog. He was saying, "Filthy, stinking bastard," and the dog was whimpering. I said, "Good evening," but the old man just went on cursing. So I asked him what the dog had done. He didn't answer. All he said was, "Filthy, stinking bastard." I could barely see him leaning over his dog, trying to fix something on its collar. I spoke louder. Then, without turning around, he answered with a kind of suppressed rage. He's always there. Then he left, yanking at the animal, which was letting itself be dragged along, whimpering. Just then my other neighbor came in. The word around the neighborhood is that he lives off women. But when you ask him what he does, he's a warehouse guard. Generally speaking, he's not very popular, but he often talks to me and sometimes stops by my place for a minute because I listen to him. I find what he has to say interesting. Besides, I don't have any reason not to talk to him. His name is Raymond Sintez. He's a little on the short side with broad shoulders and a nose like a boxer's. He always dresses very sharp, and once he said to me, talking about Salamano, if that isn't pitiful. He asked me if I didn't think it was disgusting. I said no. We went upstairs, and I was about to leave him when he said, "I've got some blood sausage and some wine at my place. How about joining me?" I figured it would save me the trouble of having to cook for myself, so I accepted. He has only one room, too, and a little kitchen with no window. Over his bed, he has a pink and white plaster angel, some pictures of famous athletes, and 2 or 3 photographs of naked women. The room was dirty and the bed was unmade. First, he lit his paraffin lamp. Then he took a pretty dubious-looking bandage out of his pocket and wrapped it around his right hand. I asked him what he'd done to it. He said he'd been in a fight with some guy who was trying to start trouble. You see, Monsieur Musso, he said, it's not that I'm a bad guy, but I have a short fuse. This guy says to me, if you're man enough, you'll get down off that streetcar. I said, come on, take it easy. Then he said, you're yellow, so I got off, and I said to him, I think you better stop right there, and I'm gonna have to teach you a lesson. And he said, you and who else? So I let him have it. He went down. I was about to help him up, but then he started kicking me there from the ground. So I kneed him one and slugged him a couple of times. His face was all bloody. I asked him if he'd had enough. He said yes. All this time, Sintez was fiddling with his bandage. I was sitting on the bed. He said, so you see, I wasn't the one who started it. He was asking for it. It was true, and I agreed. Then he told me that as a matter of fact he wanted me to ask my advice about the whole business. Because I was a man, I knew about things. I could help him out. And then we'd be pals. I didn't say anything, and he asked me again if I wanted to be pals. I said it was fine with me. He seemed pleased. He got out the blood sausage, fried it up, and set out glasses, plates, knives, and forks, and 2 bottles of wine. All this in silence. Then we sat down as we ate. As we ate, he started telling me his story. He was a little hesitant at first. I knew this lady, as a matter of fact, well, she was my mistress. The man he had the fight with was this woman's brother. He told me he'd been keeping her. I didn't say anything, and yet right away he added that he knew what people around the neighborhood were saying. But his conscience was clear, and that he was a warehouse guard. To get back to what I was saying, he continued, I realized that she was cheating on me. He'd been giving her just enough to live on. He paid the rent on her room and gave her 20 francs a day for food. 300 francs for the room, 600 for the food, a pair of stockings every now and then. That made it 1,000 francs. And Her Highness refused to work. But she was always telling me that things were too tight, that she couldn't get by on what I was giving her. And I'd say to her, why not work half days? You'd be helping me out on all the little extras. I bought you a new outfit just this month. I give you 20 francs a day. I pay your rent. And what do? You have a coffee in the afternoons with your friends. You even provide the coffee and sugar. And me? I provide the money. I've been good to you, and this is how you repay me. But she wouldn't work. She just kept telling me that she couldn't make ends meet, and that's what made me realize she was cheating on me. Then he told me that he'd found a lottery ticket in her purse, and she hadn't been able to explain how she paid for it. A short time later, he'd found a ticket from a shop in Monte de Piet in her room, which proved that she'd pawned 2 bracelets. Until then, he hadn't even known the bracelets existed. It was clear that she was cheating on me, so I left her, but first I smacked her around, and then I told her exactly what I thought of her. I told her that all she was interested in was getting into the sack. You see, Monsieur Marceau, it's like I told her. You don't realize that everybody's jealous of how good you have it with me. Someday you'll know just how good it was. He'd beaten her until she bled. He'd never beaten her before. I'd smack her around a little, but nice-like, you might say. She'd scream a little. I'd close the shutters, and it always ended the same way. But this time, it's for real, and if you ask me, she still hasn't gotten what she has coming. Then he explained what he was... He explained that... Then he explained that what he was... But... Jesus... I'm not kidding. It says, then he explained that was what he needed. Holy shit. Then he explained that was what he had needed. Oh, I added a word. I added had. Try this again. Then he explained that was what he needed. Advice? Okay. Then he explained that was what he needed advice about. He stopped to adjust the lamp's wick, which was smoking. I just listened. I'd drunk close to a liter of wine and my temples were burning. I was smoking Raymond's cigarettes because I'd run out. The last streetcars were going by, taking the now distant sounds of the neighborhood with them. Raymond went on. What bothered him was that he still had sexual feelings for her, but he wanted to punish her. First, he thought of taking her to a hotel called and calling the vice squad to cause a scandal and have her listed as a common prostitute. After that, he'd look up some of his underworld friends, but they didn't come up with anything. As Raymond pointed out to me, a lot of good it does being in the underworld. He said the same thing to them, and that they'd suggested marking her. But that wasn't what he wanted. He was going to think about it. But first, he wanted to ask me something. Before he did, though, he wanted to know what I thought of the whole thing. I said I didn't think anything, but that it was interesting. He said if I thought she was cheating on him. He asked if I thought she was cheating on him, and it seemed to me she was. If I thought she should be punished and what I would do in his place, and I said, you can't ever be sure, but I understood his wanting to punish her. I drank a little more wine, he lit a cigarette, and let me in on what he was thinking about doing. He wanted to write her a letter, one with a punch and also some things in it that make her sorry for what she's done. Then, when she came running back, he'd go to bed with her, and right at the last minute, he'd spit in her face and throw her out. Yes, that would punish her, I thought. But Raymond told me that he didn't think that he could write the kind of letter that it would take and that she'd thought of asking me to write it for him. Since I didn't say anything, he asked if I'd mind doing it right then, and I said no. He downed a glass of wine and then stood up. He pushed aside the plates and the little bit of cold sausage we'd left. He carefully wiped the oilcloth covering the table. Then from a drawer in his night table, he took out a sheet of paper, a yellow envelope, and a small red pen box, and a square bottle with purple ink in it. When he told me the woman's name, I realized she was Moorish. I wrote the letter. I did it just as it came to me. But I tried my best to please Raymond because I didn't have any reason not to please him. Then I read it out loud. He listened, smoking and nodding his head. Then he asked me to read it again. He was very pleased. He said, I could tell you knew about these things. I didn't notice at first, but he had stopped calling me Monsieur. It was only when he announced, now you're a pal, Marisol, and said it again, that it struck me. He repeated his remark, and I said yes. I didn't mind being his pal, and he seemed set on it. He sealed the letter, and when we finished off the wine, then we sat and smoked for a while without saying anything. Outside, everything was quiet. We heard the sound of a car passing. I said, it's late. Raymond thought so too. He remarked how quickly the time passed, and that in a way it was true. I felt sleepy, but it was hard for me to get up. I must have looked tired because Raymond told me not to let things get to me. At first I didn't understand. Then he explained that he'd heard about Mammon's death, but that it was one of those things that was bound to happen sooner or later. I thought so too. I got up. Raymond gave me a very firm handshake and said that men always understood each other. I left his room, closing the door behind me, and paused for a minute in the dark. On the landing, the house was quiet, and a breath of dark, dank air wafted up from the deep of the stairwell. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. I stood there, motionless. In an old Salamano's room, the dog whimpered softly. Now that's chapter 4. Recap. Let me see if I can summarize this before I watch the recap video. So there was a heavy focus on the dog, beating it. The dog also yanking him along, and the guy beating the dog. And he sat with Raymond, listened to him talk about how he got in a fight with a guy, and that the guy was actually the brother of an ex-girlfriend, and that he actually used to beat the girlfriend because he figured she was cheating on him, with no actual evidence. Just like the fact that there was like some bracelets, I think, that he didn't purchase. And then eventually Raymond had a whole plot that Merceau just kind of went with, in terms of like writing the letter for him so that she can come back, and then they would go to bed, and then as in the middle, right before the end, just spit on her and kick her out. It's a weird, the fact that she needs to be punished is kind of crazy, but I get the frustration. he was talking about work. When he got back to work, there was a bunch of invoices piled up. And he was running with somebody? That was weird. I didn't understand that. He worked hard at the office. Boss was nice. Asked me if he wasn't too tired, if he wanted to know Mom and days. About 60. Talked about wanting to wash his hands before lunch, I guess. Emmanuel. He's a dispatcher. I don't get why they started running. They started chasing after a truck. Yeah, I don't know. This chapter's weird. This book's weird. Albert Camus, Chapter 3, Summary. That was not how you spell summary. Alright, let's see. So to clarify, comes back to work. It's a little busy. Boss asks him, what's going on? Are you too tired? How old was she? Finds out it was 60. And he's like, oh, okay, whatever. Then Emmanuel, he got on his lunch break, washes his hands, sees Emmanuel. Then they start chasing after a truck. I don't know. I'm missing something there. Then when he goes home, he's talking about how he runs into Salamano, who beats his dog for it yanking him along. And then Raymond, then as the guy leaves, Raymond walks out, sees him, invites him in for some sausage, and he's like, fuck it, I don't gotta cook my potatoes, I don't gotta cook anything, I'll come in there, you're offering, I'll accept that. House is kind of a mess, trashed. They sit down talking, and he talks about how he got into a fight. The fight was actually with a guy who's the brother of an ex-girlfriend, and that he used to beat the ex-girlfriend because he found out she was cheating on him, supposedly. He never clarified any evidence besides like some bracelets. Then as they're talking, he convinces Marcelo, it'll tell me the name, I forgot how you say it. Marceau, to write a letter to convince her to come back so he could sleep with her, and then right before they finish, spit on her and kick her out to punish her. He needs to be punished. He used to provide for her nonstop. And then right at the end, as he's leaving, he's in the hallway and the dog whimpering. So someone said I don't got time to read this book. It's like 30 pages.
Chapter 3 of The Stranger, Merceau takes a break from his work for
Merceau.
lunch. He and his co-worker Emmanuel run after a truck and jump into the back, then eat lunch at Celeste's restaurant. On his way up the stairs to his...
Oh, they jump in the back? Did they? I know they leaped. Is that really what happened? Does say take hold? I didn't really catch that. Okay, that's interesting. They just rode a truck to Celeste.
Department after work that evening, Merceau meets his neighbor Salamano and Salamano's
Salamano.
dog. The dog has scabs covering its skin from a disease. Salamano also has scabs on his face. The dog and the man hate each other. Salamano constantly beats his dog and swears at it. Merceau greets Salamano on the stairs. As always, he curses at his dog. Another neighbor named Raymond approaches Merceau. Rumor has it that Raymond lives off women. He has a rough, tough guy attitude, and he invites Merceau to his room to eat blood sausage and drink wine. As they dine, Raymond claims his mistress is cheating on him. Because of this disloyalty, he has already beaten her till she bled. Merceau listens without judgment. Raymond wants to punish her more. He concocts a plan in which he will send his mistress a letter that will make her sorry for what she's done. Raymond asks Merceau whether he will write the letter. Merceau agrees to write the letter right away. Merceau writes the letter in a way that pleases Raymond because he didn't have any reason not to please him.
Which is a weird reason, but...
the letter and says that he and Merceau are now pals. Merceau, for his part, feels that he has no reason not to be Raymond's friend. They finish the wine, and Raymond tells Merceau not to let his mother's death get to him. At first, Merceau doesn't catch Raymond's reference, but then he understands and agrees as the men say goodbye to each other. This chapter shows how people have the tendency to impose their own meaning upon various events. Raymond interprets Merceau's behavior as demonstrating Merceau's sympathy toward him, even though Merceau's behavior is not that sympathetic. Salamano and Raymond serve as foils to Merceau. Salamano is in a symbiotic relationship with his dog so strong they have begun to look as if they belong to the same species, and their relationship is filled with powerful emotions. Raymond burns with the desire to punish his mistress for her infidelity. In contrast, Merceau lacks strong emotional ties to anyone. His relationship with Marie seems to be based completely on the sensory experience of sex. Merceau does not judge Raymond and willingly commits an immoral act because he has no morality. From this perspective, he is innocent of any wrongdoing because he does not view any act as right or wrong.
Huh. So he doesn't view any act as right or wrong, and therefore he's not doing anything wrong? I don't know if that's true, but okay. Okay. Interesting take. I don't know if I agree with that. See how many pages, because Trump's address to the state is coming. He did. Jesus, this one's even shorter. Yeah, we'll knock this out real quick. Chapter 4. I worked hard all week. Raymond stopped by and told me that he'd sent the letter. I went to the movies twice with Emmanuel, who doesn't always understand what's going on the screen. So you have to explain things to him. Yesterday was Saturday, and Marie came over as we'd planned. I wanted her so bad when I saw her in that pretty red and white striped dress and leather sandals. You can make out the shape of her firm breasts. And her tan made her face look like a flower. We caught a bus and went a few kilometers outside Algiers to a beach with rocks at either end, bordered by shore grass on the land side. The 4 o'clock sun wasn't too hot, but the water was warm with slow, gently lapping waves. Marie taught me a game. As you swim, you had to skim off the foam from the crests of the waves with your mouth. Hold it in there, and roll over on your back and spout it out towards the sky. This made a delicate froth which disappeared into the air, or fell back in a warm spray over my face. But after a while my mouth was stinging from the salty bitterness. Then Marie swam over to me and pressed herself against me in the water. She'd put her lips on mine. Her tongue cooled my lips, and we tumbled in the waves for a moment. When we'd gotten dressed again on the beach, Marie looked at me with her eyes sparkling. I kissed her. We didn't say anything more from that point on. I held her to me, and we hurried to catch a bus, get back, go to my place, and throw ourselves onto my bed. I left my window open, and the summer night air flowing through our brown... I'd left my window open, and the summer night air flowing over our brown bodies felt good. That morning, Marie stayed, and I told her that we'd have lunch together. I went downstairs to buy some meat. On my way back upstairs, I heard a woman's voice in Ramon's room. A little later, old Salamano growled at his dog. We heard the sound of footsteps and claws on the wooden stairs, and then, "Lousy, stinking bastard!" and they went down into the street. I told Marie all about the old man, and she laughed. She was wearing a pair of my pajamas with the sleeves rolled up. When she laughed, I wanted her again. A minute later, she asked me if I loved her. I told her that it didn't mean anything, but that I didn't think so. I told her it didn't mean anything, but that I didn't think so. She looked sad. But as we were fixing lunch, for no apparent reason, she laughed in such a way that I kissed her. It was then that we heard what sounded like a fight break out in Ramon's room. First, we heard a woman's shrill voice, and then Ramon saying, "You used me! You used me! I'll teach you to use me!" Then there were some thuds, and the woman screamed, but in such a terrifying way that the landing immediately filled with people. Marie and I went to see, too. The woman was still shrieking and Ramon was still hitting her. Marie said it was terrible and that I didn't say anything. She asked me to go find a policeman, but I told her I didn't like cops. One showed up anyway with a tenant from the third floor, who was a plumber. The cop knocked at the door and we couldn't hear anything anymore. He knocked harder and after a minute the woman started crying and Ramon opened the door. He had a cigarette in his mouth and an innocent look on his face. The girl rushed to the door and told the policeman that Ramon hit her. "What's your name?" the cop said. Ramon told him. "Take that cigarette out of your mouth when you're talking to me," the cop said. Ramon hesitated, looked at me, and took a drag on his cigarette. Right then the cop slapped him, a thick, heavy smack right across the face. The cigarette went flying across the landing. The look on Ramon's face changed, but he didn't say anything for a minute, and then he asked in a meek voice if he could pick up his cigarette. The cop said to go ahead and added, "Next time you'll know better than to clown around with a policeman." Meanwhile, the girl was crying and she repeated, "He beat me up. He's a pimp, officer." Ramon asked, "Is that legal, calling a man a pimp like that?" But the cop ordered him to shut his trap. Then Ramon turned to the girl and said, "You just wait, sweetheart. We're not through yet." The cop told him to knock it off, said that the girl was to go and that he was to stay in his room and wait to be summoned to the police station. He said that Ramon ought to be ashamed to be so drunk that he'd have the shakes like that. Then Ramon explained, "I'm not drunk, officer. It's just that I'm here and you're there, and I'm shaking. I can't help it." He shut his door and everybody went away. Marie and I finished fixing lunch, but she wasn't hungry. I ate almost everything. She left at 1 o'clock and I slept a while. Around 3 o'clock there was a knock on my door and Ramon came in. I didn't get up. He sat down on the edge of my bed. Just walked in. He didn't say anything for a minute, and I asked him how it had all gone. He told me that he'd done what he wanted to do, but that she'd slapped him so that he'd beaten her up. I'd seen the rest. I told him it seemed to me that she'd just gotten her punishment now, and he ought to be happy. He thought so too. And he pointed out that the cop could do anything he wanted. It wouldn't change the fact that she'd gotten her beating. He added that he knew all about cops and how to handle them. Then he asked me if I'd expected him to hit the cop back. I said I wasn't expecting anything, besides I didn't like cops. Raymond seemed pretty happy. He asked me if I wanted to go for a walk with him. I got up and started combing my hair. He told me that I'd have to act as a witness for him. It didn't matter to me, but I didn't know what I was supposed to say. According to Raymond, all I had to do was state that the girl had cheated on him. I agreed to act as a witness for him. We went out and Raymond bought me a brandy. Then he wanted to shoot a game of pool, and I just barely lost. Afterwards, he wanted to go to a whorehouse, and I said no. But I said no because I didn't like that. Because I don't like that. So we took our time getting back, him telling me how glad he was that he'd been able to give that woman what she deserved. I found him very friendly with me, and I thought it was a nice moment. From a distance, I noted old Salomono standing on the doorstep. He looked flustered. When we got closer, I saw that he didn't have his dog. He was looking all over the place, turning around, peering into the darkness of the entryway, muttering incoherently, and then he started searching the streets again with his little red eyes. When Ramon asked him what was wrong, he didn't answer right away. I barely heard him mumble, "Stinking bastard." And he went fidgeting around. He went on fidgeting around. I asked him where his dog was. He snapped at me and said he was gone, and then all of a sudden the words came pouring out. "I took him to the parade ground, like always. There were lots of people around the booths at the fair. I stopped to watch the king of the escape artists, and when I was ready to go, he wasn't there. Sure, I've been meaning to get him a smaller collar for a long time, but I never thought that bastard would take off like that." Then Ramon pointed out to him that the dog might have gotten lost and that he could come back. He gave examples of dogs that had walked dozens of kilometers to get back to their masters. Nevertheless, the old man looked even more flustered. "But they'll take him away from me, don't you see? If only somebody would take him in. But that's impossible. Everybody's disgusted by his scabs. The police will get him for sure." So I told him he should go to the pound and they'd give the dog back to him after he paid a fee. He asked me if it was a big fee. I didn't know. Then he got mad. "Pay money for that bastard? Ha! He can damn well die." And he started cursing the dog. Ramon laughed and went inside. I followed him and we parted upstairs at the landing. A minute later I heard the old man's footsteps and he knocked on my door. When I opened it, he stood in the doorway for a minute and said, excuse me. I asked him to come in, but he refused. He was looking down at the tips of his shoes with his scabby hands were trembling. Without looking up at me, he asked, "They're not going to take him away from me, are they, Monsieur Marceau? They'll give him back to me, otherwise what's going to happen to me?" I told him that the pound kept dogs 3 days so that their owners could come and claim them, and that after that they did with them as they saw fit. He looked at me in silence, and he said, "Good night." He shut his door, and I heard him pacing back and forth. His bed creaked, and from the peculiar little noise coming through the partition, I realized he was crying. For some reason I thought of Mammon. But I had to get up early the next morning. I wasn't hungry, and I went to bed without any dinner. What up, Pike? Alright, that was chapter 4. That was another short one. Now I'm on chapter 5. Okay, so that... He went for a walk with Ramon. He worked hard. Went to the movies with Emmanuel. I'm doing good, man. How about you? How are you doing? I'm just trying to read more books, and this is a good way for me to do that. Hold myself accountable, stream it, so I actually just lock in and focus and read. It's the only reason. Hung out with Marie. Talked about how attractive she was. Hung out with her at the beach. Then they went back to his place. Did the nasty. Then the next morning, talking about fixing lunch, she asked him if he loved her. He said he didn't think so, but it didn't mean anything. She was sad. She appeared sad. Then they heard a woman shriek from Ramon's room, and everybody showed up, and he was beating her. And a cop showed up, smacked him for not respecting him. The cop smacked Ramon, and the woman left. And then the next day, Marie and him finished lunch. She left. He slept for a little bit, and then around 3 o'clock, Ramon came in his house, knocked on him, and walked in while he was in bed still. Asked him, "What do you think? You know, did you think I was in the wrong?" You know, asked for his opinion. He's like, I don't like cops. I didn't expect you to do anything." Then they went for a walk. And then on their way back, where'd they go? They went somewhere. Bottom of brandy. I don't know what that is. And then Ramon suggested going to a whorehouse, and he said, "No, I don't like that, Marcel." And as they're walking back, old Solano's outside the house, doesn't know where his dog is. Man, he apparently starts crying about his missing dog. Poor guy. Poor guy. So far we are in the book. We're almost done. What page am I on? I'm on page 40. Alright. Crack open the summary, and then I'm gonna watch the address. State of the Union address.
In part 1, chapter 4 of The Stranger, during the week, Marceau works and goes to the movies twice with Emmanuel. On Saturday, Mirceau and Marie go to the beach and swim in the ocean. They play a game that involves skimming off foam from waves with their mouths and then spewing the foam into the air. They kiss, head to the beach, dress, and catch a bus back to Algiers. Mirceau and Marie sleep together and have lunch the next day. Marie asks whether Mirceau loves her. He replies that he doesn't think so. This response makes her sad, but she brightens up while preparing lunch. Mirceau and Marie hear a fight break out in Raymond's room. A woman screams, and people fill the hallway to witness Raymond beating his mistress. Marie thinks the situation is terrible, but Mirceau does not respond. A police officer arrives and orders Raymond to remove a cigarette from his mouth. Raymond refuses, and the officer slaps him. Then the officer tells Raymond's mistress to leave and tells Raymond that he will be summoned. Raymond retreats to his apartment, and the officer and everyone else leave. Mirceau and Marie finish making lunch, but she has lost her appetite. But Mirceau, unshaken, ate almost everything. Marie leaves, and Raymond visits Mirceau. Raymond explains why he fought with his mistress and asks whether Mirceau will serve as a character witness for him. Mirceau agrees. They go into the town and shoot pool. On their way home, they notice Salamano searching for his dog that he lost at the parade ground. He fears the police will pick it up and refuse to give it back to him. Even though Salamano is perpetually angry at his dog, he misses it. Mirceau and Raymond part, and Mirceau goes back to his room. He hears Salamano knocking on his door and answers. Salamano asks anxiously, "They're not going to take him away from me, are they?" Mirceau explains how the pound handles dogs. Salamano leaves. Mirceau hears the old man pacing in his room and crying. This reminds Mirceau of his mother. Mirceau doesn't provide expected responses. For example, he brushes off Marie's question about his love for her. To him, their time together is just a series of pleasant sensations, having nothing to do with love. Near the end of the chapter, when Salamano pathetically asks Mirceau to offer him hope by affirming that the dog will be returned to him, Mirceau just matter-of-factly relates the procedures of the dog pounds. Because Mirceau views life as fundamentally meaningless, he has no reason to provide hope. Losing a dog is the same as beating a woman, eating breakfast, or any other action.
Huh. Okay. I like the book so far. It's interesting. I'm excited reading it. I'm excited to pick it up. It's an interesting story. I'm used to reading nonfiction, like books like philosophy and politics, and this is the first story I've read in a minute. I like it. So I'll continue. I'll probably be back tomorrow to watch it, or I might go climbing. I'll do both. I love you. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.